My name is Victoria Illen. I work with Southern Tier Central. We're the regional planning board that serves Steuben, Schuyler, and Chemung County. Southern Tier Central, as the local development district, provides grant assistance to applicants. The first thing that we're going to do is promote the ARC grant cycle, which is what I'm doing with you all now. We keep the material on the website and update what New York State gives to us. We talk with potential applicants about what things are allowable and not allowable, and then we'll help guide you towards a project that is fundable by ARC. We'll help you to identify sources of match, either cash match from other grant programs, cash from your own organization, or in-kind resources that may be available through your organization or in partnership with other nonprofits and local governments in the area. If you submit your grant material to us before the deadline, I can review it and I'll go through and respond to your thoughts, describe what part, highlight the areas of your narrative that are superior and identify areas that could be beefed up a little. If I'm reading through your narrative and I have questions, then the ARC reviewer is probably going to have those same questions as well. So that review and draft update is a great opportunity for you to strengthen your application. And then once the applications are finally submitted, our office does an internal review, our committees do a review, and then our board does a final vote of the package that we're sending to New York State. Local governments, educational institutions, and economic development agencies in our region are eligible to apply for ARC funds. The nonprofits are also eligible. You can put together consortiums of these eligible applicants, and then you can also have a consortium headed by an eligible applicant that includes ineligible applicants. So businesses can be a partner to an application, but they cannot be the lead applicant and they can't be the only beneficiary. Ineligible activities, ARC cannot fund ongoing programs. So if you already received state money or DOT money or some kind of federal money to start up and operate a program, and then there's a budget cut that impacts your program, ARC can't go in and backfill that hole. ARC has to fund something that's new or different. And ARC can't fund a budget overrun and it can't fund a budget cut that you've faced. ARC can't promote unfair competition between businesses in the same service area, and they can't enrich for-profit organizations or individuals. So I often get called about historic structures. Someone will say, I moved into this beautiful historic structure. It needs so much work. And I say, I'm happy that you're preserving a historic structure, but ARC can't renovate your house and make it nice or more historic. That would just make you richer. And the Appalachian Regional Commission funding is designated to improve the people of Appalachia, to bring them out of poverty and to increase their workforce opportunities. Project types not well suited for Appalachian Regional Commission. Now, this is a slide directly from ARC. The ARC is not particularly keen on funding community centers or the construction of daycare centers. They are not very interested in public art installations or parks that are not beneficial to businesses. They're not interested in street repaving, housing projects, municipal buildings or services like fire, police, courthouse, and ambulance, nor are they interested in purely residential water or sewer projects unless there's a specifically distressed area with a compelling need. The construction of child care centers is not particularly appropriate for ARC, but ARC has funded all the equipment purchases and playground equipment for several child cares in the area, as well as training for child care staff, and studies on childcare and activities accomplished at the local level to improve childcare, like the Pro Action childcare program, where they brought people from registered but unlicensed up to licensed to increase capacity. So the ARC requires match, and in our communities of Steuben, Schuyler, and Chemung, the match is 50-50. The project has to be funded fully before the project can go forward. In this case, that means ARC is a reimbursement-based program. You're going to spend some money and then issue the receipts to ARC, then they will reimburse you for the expenses. That 50-50 breaks down so that if you have a $100,000 project, ARC will pay $50,000 and you have to have resources to cover the other $50,000. When you're devising your project budget, match is helpful, and ARC can reimburse you for in-kind match that has been expended by yourself or partner agencies. But as we all know, you can't eat match. So you have to make sure that the expenses of the project are at least covered by all the cash in the project. That a project could end up match heavy, but when you actually need to spend money, you have to have enough of cash from ARC to cover your spending expenses. The maximum allowable grant by New York State is $500,000 at this time. Our local limit is something closer to $250,000 for a construction project, but it can go higher. Smaller projects in the amounts of $6,000 to $25,000 have been funded, and they've been very successful. A couple of organizations like the Village of Hammondsport and Southern Tier Network have put in sequential applications, a small one, to do internal assessments, and then a slightly larger small project to do an evaluation by an engineer, and then finally a larger engineering project or the larger construction project to go forward with the endeavor. Those kinds of sequential applications are fine and well supported by the Appalachian Regional Commission. So if you feel like you're only ready to take a small bite right now, that's fine. There are several other larger funding pools through the Appalachian Regional Commission, which are POWER, and that's to specifically do workforce improvements in communities that are coal impacted. And New York State assures us we are all coal impacted. Work, which is a no match up to $1 million+ grant program specifically to do high intensity workforce training and job placement, including all wraparound services, as well as INSPIRE, which is a substance abuse and recovery treatment-based program to bring people back into the workforce, and ARISE, which is any interstate ARC projects to work on workforce. And then finally, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which can do larger project funding. Those application material for those applications is basically similar to the same area development project application that we'll talk about today. They just happen on a different timeline. Each one has their own deadline. So if you're interested in ARC's area development program, that'll be due in September 19th. And all the others have rolling timeframes that we try and keep you informed of. If you're interested, let us know. So the type of match that can come to an ARC project is cash match, in-kind, or a combination. So ARC is incredibly flexible in their use of matching resources. The fact that your partner can serve your project and then ARC will pay you back that money in cash is invaluable. But a lot of the nonprofits and human service type applications fall down when it comes to identifying that partner match. But I encourage you can reach out broadly to your partners and come up with a network that might be able to cover those costs and some of those costs, and you would be reimbursed by Appalachian Regional Commission. ARC doesn't want to see 37 kinds of match in the application. They would rather you keep it to 4 or 5 letters documenting that in-kind match, but we can work with you to make sure that it all works out on paper. And this match needs to be secured before the ARC project can be signed off by the federal government, because ARC money has to be the last in. So you have to get all your ducks in the row, and then ARC money comes in to push you over the finish line and get the project there. It's not the easiest process. It's kind of long. And then this last in criteria that ARC has set makes it so that people use ARC when they have to. This isn't necessarily the first choice of funding that's available to a nonprofit or government, but it's there for you if you actually need it. The application process. Because it's a unique state, federal, and local partnership, our review process respects that. So our review process is also a state, federal, and local process. The applications will be due to STC September 19th, but as I said, I could review draft material if you submit it to me in advance. Once I have a look at it, I send it to our committees, and then our committee reviews it about a week after I get it. The committee has a week to look at it on their own, and then they have a meeting where they evaluate the applications and create suggestions so that each applicant can strengthen their own application and therefore improve their chances of receiving funding. The committees may ask questions and say, well, we read the application 3 times and we still aren't sure how you're connecting item B and item C. There doesn't seem to be a natural flow there. And we'll say, go ahead and add another sentence or two explaining how those two items are connected. Or the committee may say, I found a typo. And then we will identify those typos. And the committee may identify errors in your math. So you can go back through and make sure all your numbers in the SF424 match all the letters of support and everything that's written in the narrative. So the committee will provide that commentary. We will notify the applicants. They will have a week to make those changes, and then it goes to our board. Our board will review, rank, and approve a final list that gets sent to New York State. New York State holds on to that list for quite a while. New York State waits until well after all the CFA grants have been awarded before they start looking at the ARC packages, because so many ARC projects are matched by CFA funds. Come March, New York State begins to look at the ARC applications, and by May, they've usually transmitted them to ARC for approval. June, July 2025 is when you'd expect to see actual contracts being signed by ARC, making the project real, allowing you to begin spending down that money. So that's an application in September 2024 for funding in summer 2025. And the next thing is a little flow chart of it visually. So you're right now, if you're thinking about an ARC application, you should potentially hire consultants, start working on support letters, have a look at all the forms, look at the questions in the narrative, figure out when you're going to need to get board resolutions and signatures if you do need those things to complete the application. You'll submit the application to me in September. I'll review it, the committee reviews it, the board approves and ranks it. Those rankings are submitted to New York State, and then the New York Department of State will review it and develop the statewide project package, which is approved by the Secretary of State in May of 2025. ARC will have as much time as they like to review it, but then they typically do a turnaround of 6 to 8 weeks. ARC has identified these 4 items that make a really great project. They want a program that's strategic. And we can reference the regional council here. They like to see a project that's aligned with the county plans, whatever plan that's set forth that manages your organization. They want a plan that is consistent with the state's goals, which in our case is the Regional Economic Development Council strategy. So please go ahead and utilize all of those resources when developing your application. They want a project that's impactful. So that's good bang for the buck on the ARC dollar. And there is no set in stone model for how many jobs you need to create or how many people you need to train, per $25,000 or $50,000. But you should be aware that there's only $450,000 being allocated by the STC region for this program. And so your ask should be proportional to the number of people you can assist and how you think your project will rank with all the other possible applicants that we're going to have. We'll typically fund 1 or 2 $200,000 projects, and then several $70,000 or $50,000 projects, and maybe 1 or 2 little projects, just to round out the list of people who are considering the funding. ARC wants projects that are collaborative, so that's multiple partners that are either committed or engaged to the project, and in-kind match and in-kind support from those partners helps demonstrate collaboration. And ARC requires that all funded projects are sustainable. ARC wants you to demonstrate in the application that you have a plan for the project to remain successful after ARC funds are no longer available. So that may be a funding model that you're already using on some other program, and you'll explain to ARC how you'll use the other funding model to support this new program after the startup. Or you may say that, we anticipate some baseline funding coming from the state that supports these types of activities, but the state can't do startup. So in that way, you can make the case that your project would be sustainable. And then ARC further states that they want applications that are clear, concise, comprehensive, and consistent. So be direct in your narrative. You don't have to make it longer than it needs to be. And particularly if you're coming in with a smaller grant application in the $10,000 to $40,000 range, it doesn't need to be more than 8 pages. If you're going up higher in the $250,000 or going for the big $500,000 or $1 million application through one of the larger ARC funds, you can be a little bit more verbose and then share more in the narrative. The application should be comprehensive, and in that in that way, it should include all the items on the checklists, but also answer any outstanding questions that the reviewer might have, and it should be consistent. So all the numbers should be the same from the beginning of the SF 424s down to the letters of support at the back. Everybody should be referencing the same sets of numbers. ARC has 5 general goals, and we're going to work through some of the example projects that ARC has provided. So ARC will fund the construction of an incubator or an industrial site under Goal 1, and IDAs or incubators can provide technical assistance to businesses also under Goal 1. Goal 2 is building Appalachia's workforce ecosystem, and so ARC can fund construction of training centers, or they can fund workforce training programs, healthcare, substance abuse disorder recovery programs, as well as buying curriculum. You know, ARC can pay for the curriculum, and then the district can agree to make all the photocopies and have in-kind staff time to take the training. And in that way, you get a whole new curriculum paid for by ARC, and then the in-kind match is the match. Goal 3 is infrastructure. So that's water, sewer, broadband, roads, and EV charging networks. And then planning and needs assessments can also be conducted by the Appalachian Regional, can be funded by the Appalachian Regional Commission. Number 4 is building regional culture and tourism. So you can construct trails and renovate historic buildings as it relates to tourism. And you can also do tourism promotion as a non-construction project. And finally, building community leadership and capacity. Non-construction would be studies of existing problems that are occurring in your community or nonprofits like you, as well as training to improve the ability of the leaders in your organization to handle problems. And the board development program is a community leadership and capacity building program that was funded by ARC at the start. And STC is going to just continue those efforts as part of our ongoing activities. So ARC program areas, again, they'll fund asset-based development, community infrastructure, education and training, certain types of energy projects, health projects, telecommunications, entrepreneurship, export trade development, tourism. New York State has a long series of priorities that are listed here, and they're also included on our website. One of the first questions on the application is, which New York State goal and strategy are you aligned with? And we can just go through that document together to make sure that we're grabbing the right goal and strategy. I have to read through it each and every time that I need to, so I don't expect any of you guys to memorize all the goals and strategies offhand. It's just something that we have to do together. The next slide includes a map of the distressed areas in the Appalachian Regional Commission. Our counties are all transitional. Those are highlighted in white. So we're not eligible for anything other than 50-50 match. Those communities in orange and red have a different match ratio, and communities in blue are pretty much ineligible for ARC funding. Once you have reached national attainment, the ARC is not going to be engaging with funding projects in your area because you have achieved the goal of parity with the nation in alleviating poverty. And until we have reached that parity, which we have not, we are still eligible for ARC funding at the 50-50 level. We have distressed tracts. Fortunately, there are none in Schuyler, but if a project is going to be partnering with Chemung or serving the Elmira area, you would mention that there is a distressed tract in Elmira and that this project may provide benefits for those individuals. There are also opportunity zones, 2 in Schuyler County, and you would want to mention that those opportunity zones are present and that your project will assist with people or business opportunities in those opportunity zones. And then finally, we get to start talking about the specifics around a construction project. A construction project is anything that needs a building permit, basically. So we, for years, have guided potential ARC applicants towards the purchase of equipment because that's non-construction. Construction projects get a little more difficult in that they need a basic agency. This is an agency that oversees the actual construction and installation of a new building, structure, site, trail, anything like that. Because the ARC doesn't have staff on hand to confirm that the trail was actually built, they rely on their basic agency to make sure that everything is done above board, following all the necessary rules, and that all the funding was in place, all the finances were right, and then the reimbursements are made. So your basic agency would actually be the person that you're communicating with on the project for construction on a day-to-day or monthly, quarterly basis. You would submit all your reporting to the basic agency, not to the ARC. And then we get to this next slide, which includes a little flow chart. If it's a non-construction project, there's no basic agency needed. If it is a construction project, you're going to need a basic agency. And if EDA, New York State EFC, or Empire State Development, HUD or CDBG or rural development are involved in the project at the start, then there's your natural basic agency. You make sure to go to that funder and say, we are pursuing an ARC project. We'd like you to act as basic agency for the ARC funds. And then they say yes. And then you include that in your ARC application and it's done. If none of those funding sources are part of your original funding package, then you're going to have to use USDA. And if you're going through the process of getting USDA as a basic agency, that includes completing the entire USDA application. I'm going to ask you to go back in and work your project so that you're going to apply to USDA for money, either a grant or a low interest loan. But if you're going through all the work of completing a USDA application, you might as well get some kind of grant support out of it. And USDA has like 60 different funding pools that they can use for a variety of projects. So I hope that there's something in there available and appropriate for your project. Our local guy is Tom Becker out of Bath. So the first steps on your application are to review the application materials, which include that SF424 form, to just kind of get a handle on what you're dealing with. And as you go through, just start writing your ideas in the documents. Just keep improving it. Every time you go through, read through what you wrote the last time and give it another go. Start adding additional resources as you're having ideas and conversations with your partners. Just start filling in those application materials. Don't save it to the end. It's available on our website. It's composed of like 16 different forms that you have to complete each one separately and then kind of aggregate it. And if you have problems with PDF, you can come to my office or send them to me, or I print them and scan them. But one way or another, we'll get it all jammed together into an acceptable format. So consider your sources of match, because we need you to get up to 50-50 money. Devise a way to make your project sustainable in year 2. Get in contact with all your project partners, and then reach out to HUD or USDA if you need a basic agency. How long is the application? The full application may be 20 to 45 pages, and it includes a project summary form, the new SF424 form, which is 3 pages long, and then you do either SF424A and B for non-construction projects or SF424C and D for construction projects, as well as pages of certifications, assurances, agreements, the New York State Smart Growth Compliance Form, then your project narrative, your budget narrative, all your commitments of match, individual letters of support, and then the required letter of support from the Regional Economic Development Council. That letter earns you 5 additional points in the review of your project. So I encourage you to reach out to Judy. You would, if you're doing a construction project, you should have a preliminary basic agency letter. It requires a map of the proposed project area, but between STC's mapping capacity and the mapping capacity that's on the census website now, the ARC application requires that you include a map, and you can utilize the US Census website to develop a decent map for these project needs, and you have to really well quantify your project outcomes. So completing the application, the construction application is longer, and it's going to require a preliminary engineering report or some kind of cost estimates. And the non-construction application can be shorter, but you have to work a little bit harder to prove the impact. Because, if we talk about bringing out water and sewer to an industrial site, there's your impact, right? You've made the case very easily. But if you're talking about training people or buying equipment for a daycare facility, you'll have to go through a little bit more narrative explaining how this is connected to economic growth for the people of Appalachia. You can access the application materials and the additional guidance, as well as all the state documents, on our website. And you can call me if you have any questions. And now we're just going to go through a couple of items. These outputs and outcomes this is official formal language from the Appalachian Regional Commission. There are some paired outputs and outcomes. If you're going to serve a business with an incubator, then you need to quantify both the number of businesses that will be served and the number of businesses that are going to be improved by after having received your assistance or training. Similarly, if you're training individuals or workers, you're going to be serving a certain number by bringing them into the program. But how many of those individuals are going to be improved by graduating from the program, utilizing the skills that they have received in their employment or securing employment at a higher wage? You can also have the outputs of businesses served, new visitors, organizations served, patients served, as well as your classic millions of gallons per day for water lines or increased number of people accessing EV charging stations. ARC is pretty great in that they let you craft your own performance measures based on the application that you're putting forth. You have this whole page and more to consider, and then you choose the right one for you, and you make the case that these 50 people I'm going to serve are worth the $75,000 that we're applying for the program. And you get to tune it so that the impact is right and that you're going to have the most impact that you can in the community. And then we'll balance at the STC level how we can impact the most communities by funding the best projects that come for our region. Then we get to the budget narrative form. There are 5 classes listed, 5 or 6 classes listed here: travel costs, equipment costs, supplies, contractual, other, and indirect. You can please try to the best of your ability to keep your funding ideas inside these ARC classes, because these classes are compatible with their online grant management system. If you go off and start inventing new classes, it's not compatible with their recording system, and it can break ArcNet. So if you have questions about how to fit any of your existing planned costs into this narrative format, into this diagrammatic format, you can call me or you can call Dot Rector, who is newly employed at our office, and she's terrific at ArcNet and making sure that all of this financial stuff works out in the end. I've had a question frequently about indirect cost rates. You can use a de minimis cost rate, or you can show how your indirect costs are calculated. And so indirect costs can be included in the ARC application. And then when we get down to the budget narrative question, write the budget narrative so that future you knows what you intended to do with this money when you wrote the application 9 months ago, right? Because there may be staff changeover in your organization. You may have to bring your new accountant online. You may have to explain to staff how you intended to use the application and how they need to mark up different category, different expenses into different funding categories. So write all that into the budget narrative. Make it useful for you. You could write it so that your board knows how you're matching the different funding sources together and in-kind sources. You should make sure that all of the categories in the budget narrative match the categories in the SF 424. Don't create the new categories, and don't include your staff by their name. Include their job titles or the work that's being accomplished by that staff person. That way, if you do have staff changes, you don't need to go back in and change the application. And then finally, ARC needs to be the last in on the project. So you have to have secured all the other match sources on this table, the sources and uses table, before you get to the time that ARC is going to sign and approve your grant. How it works with respect to the CFA is that you would say agency, program, or contact information. You'd say NYSERDA, right? Or New York State Parks in that first box. And then you'd say pending, or you'd say committed in the second box. And then you'd put the amount that you're expecting from the CFA award under state in the fourth box. And underneath that funding status where you say committed, you'd say expected award announcement on the date that the CFAs will be announced. And if that is, your 50% source of match for the project and the CFA doesn't go forward, then your project pretty much died. And so unless you are able to come up with another source of match, we just take this application and then it comes out of the pool. New York State doesn't transmit it to ARC. If your project was funded most of the way, but for some reason the CFA didn't get you there, or they only allocated 75% of the ask that you made, we can go through with New York State and then do a modification to the application. So after we know how all of your other grant applications were or were not funded, you can go back in and tighten everything up, make sure that you have enough match to cover everything, because New York State can't send it to ARC unless it's got all the match in place. So that's partially why New York State has such a long delay, that we submit the applications to them in October, and then they're waiting to see what other grant awards are made for these projects. And by the time we get to May, we should know all that money needs to be secured, and ARC has to be the last money in. Consolidated funding application. So on the note of the CFA, pretty much everything that ARC would fund, the CFA would fund. So if you are thinking about an ARC project, I strongly encourage you to make a good go at putting together a CFA for that same project. It's a one-stop application process where you go into the state portal and you put in information about your grant, your whole program, and then your grant can be reviewed by a bunch of different funders. So that's how it's consolidated. One of the easiest and most descriptive types of this mechanism I can put forth to you is Southern Tier Central did an application called Planning in Water's Way. And we said, we're going to bring 20% of the project cost from our own resources. We were going to then apply to the CFA for another 40% of the project cost. And then with that money that the CFA gave, we applied to ARC for the final 40% of the project cost. And so we were able to do an economic development strategy for how to mitigate flood impacts of businesses and important government and nonprofit buildings that are in the flood plain. And then do some cost estimates for them about what the different mitigation options are for buildings of this type, sites of this type in our community. So that project was called Planning in Water's Way, and it was made up of some in-kind cash, an Empire State Development Grant, and then that pairs beautifully with an Appalachian Regional Commission Planning Grant. I anticipate that if there's parks or trails money, you could apply for an ARC Parks and Trails, a trail development or a trailhead development project to match with that.